There are secrets that entire communities bury so deep that even the people living inside them forget they were ever buried. I grew up in one of those communities, and for the first 18 years of my life I believed that silence was the same thing as peace. It is not. I'm going to tell you something today that I have never said out loud to anyone outside of these four walls, about a girl, about what happened to her, and about the world that made her disappear. Her name doesn't matter, because in my community girls like her didn't have names for very long. My name is Elsie, and I've been out of the Amish community for almost 4 years now. When people hear the word Amish, they picture quilts and barn raisings, and peaceful farms in the golden afternoon light. They picture something quaint, something safe, something untouched by the cruelty of the modern world. What they don't picture is what happens behind the closed doors of the farmhouses. What happens in the whispered conversations between women doing laundry. What happens when someone breaks a rule that was never written down but everyone knows. I grew up in a strict Old Order Amish community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We had no electricity, no telephones, no mirrors that were more than a handspan wide. We woke before the sun, we worked until we couldn't see, and we prayed every single night that God would find us worthy. I loved my family. I still love them. But love is not the same thing as freedom, and I learned that the hard way, not through my own story first, but through hers. She was my closest friend, her name was Rachel. And what happened to Rachel is the reason I left. But before I can tell you her story, you need to understand the world we lived in, because without that none of it will make sense. And trust me, you need it to make sense. The first thing you learn as an Amish child is not how to read. It's not how to pray, or how to work. The first thing you learn is how to be quiet. Not just physically quiet, though that is expected of girls at all times in the presence of men. I mean something deeper, a quieting of the self. Of your wants, your questions, your doubts. We had a word for it. We called it Gelassenheit, which in German means submission, or yielding. To yield to God, to yield to the church, to yield to your parents and eventually to your husband. I remember being maybe 7 years old and asking my mother why the bishop got to decide when our family could and couldn't travel to visit relatives. I asked it innocently enough, the way children ask things, not looking for a fight, just curious. My mother didn't answer. She looked at me with a kind of tired sadness in her eyes, and she put her finger to her lips. That was my answer. I learned quickly that certain questions were not questions at all. They were tests, and failing them had consequences not just for you, but for your whole family. In the outside world, the way you dress is a form of self-expression. It tells people something about who you are. In the Amish world, it's the opposite. Clothing is designed to tell people that you are nobody, or rather that you are no one apart from the community. Every girl in my district wore the same thing. A plain dress, dark blue, dark green, or dark gray. A white prayer cap on our heads, pinned at the sides. An apron. Simple shoes. No jewelry. No patterns. No color that might make you stand out. The idea was humility. If everyone looks the same, no one is better than anyone else. But here is what they don't tell you about making everyone look the same. When something happens to you, something personal, something private, something that is happening to your body, the community will notice long before you are ready for them to. Rachel was 16 when I first noticed she had started wearing her apron differently, tied higher, looser. In our world, you pay attention to things like that, because there is nothing else to pay attention to. I asked her about it once, quietly while we were hanging laundry on the line. She didn't answer me. She just kept her eyes on the sheets, and her hands moving, and I watched her jaw tighten. Let me explain how Amish courtship works, because the outside world gets this very wrong. There is something called Rumspringa, a period, usually starting around age 16, when Amish teenagers are given a measure of freedom to experience the outside world before they decide whether to be baptized into the church. Some communities are very strict about this. Others are slightly looser. Mine was strict. But even within Rumspringa, relationships between boys and girls were watched, monitored, discussed. Dating was not done in secret. There was a process. A boy would approach a girl's father. There would be supervised time together, chaperoned walks, church gatherings. The whole community would observe and silently approve or disapprove. Human beings are human beings. Even inside the most controlled environments on earth, hearts move toward each other in the dark. Rachel had been seeing someone. I didn't know who. She wouldn't tell me. Even when I begged her, all she said was that it was complicated, that it was someone she couldn't be seen with openly, and that she loved him. In a world where love is supposed to follow approval, she had made the mistake, or maybe the brave, desperate human choice of letting love come first. The problem was that love in our world did not stay private for long, especially not when it left evidence. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. In the Amish community, premarital pregnancy is not just a personal crisis. It is not just a family matter. It becomes a community matter, immediately, completely, without mercy for how it arrived. It is considered a sin against God, against the church, against the order of life that the entire community has agreed to uphold. And it is one of the most visible sins there is, because unlike drinking too much at a gathering, or speaking harshly to your spouse, or harboring unkind thoughts about your neighbor, this one eventually shows. The morning Rachel's mother found out, and I only know this because Rachel told me in fragments, over months it was not a conversation, it was not a discussion. Rachel told me her mother sat down at the kitchen table and did not speak for a long time, and then she said very quietly, "Your father cannot know until we have spoken to the bishop." Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "What do you need?" Your father cannot know until we have spoken to the bishop, because in our world, the first question is not about the girl. The first question is always about the church. I have thought about that sentence every single day since Rachel told it to me. I have turned it over and over in my hands like a stone. And it still cuts me. Rachel was 16 years old. She was frightened. She was sick every morning and couldn't hide it. She was in love with someone she couldn't name out loud. And the first response of the woman who was supposed to protect her above all others was to manage the optics. The optics, for a church. In Old Order Amish communities, when a member commits what is considered a serious sin and premarital pregnancy is absolutely in that category, there is a process. First, there is a meeting with the bishop and the ministers. The girl in it is almost always framed around the girl. Not the young man involved must appear before them. She must confess. She must show remorse. She must submit to whatever correction the church decides is necessary. This can include a period of what is called ban, or church ban. Being banned means you are cut off, not allowed to take communion, not allowed to eat at the same table as baptized members of your family. In some cases, not allowed to be spoken to at all. This is not exile. You are still physically present. You still live in the house. You still do the chores, but you are invisible. Imagine that for a moment. Being physically in a room full of people who love you, who you have known every day of your life, and having them look past you as if you are not there. Rachel was not yet baptized at the time. That fact spared her from the harshest forms of the ban, but it did not spare her from the weight of it. She stood in front of the bishop and the ministers. She was maybe 5 months along by then, and wearing her apron as high and loose as it would go, though it didn't matter anymore. Everyone already knew. She confessed. She wept. She asked for forgiveness. And then they told her what would happen. She would marry. Quickly. There was no discussion about whether this was what she wanted. There was no question of whether the young man who, I later found out, was the son of a deacon from a neighboring district was a good person, or a safe person, or someone Rachel could build a life with. There was only the question of timing. How quickly could it be arranged to preserve what remained of both families standing in their respective communities? Rachel told me all of this in pieces, at night, while the rest of the house slept. And every piece made me feel something I had no name for yet. It would take me 2 more years to find the name. The name was rage. I want to pause here and talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough when people talk about communities like mine. The shame. Not the shame that comes from outsiders looking in and judging. That is real, but it is survivable. You can build walls against that kind of shame. I'm talking about the shame that is built into you from before you can walk. The shame that lives inside your own chest like a second heartbeat. That tells you that your feelings are sins, that your body is a liability, that your personhood ends where the community's approval begins. Rachel blamed herself, completely, totally, in a way that I found terrifying to witness. She did not say, "I was 16 and in love and frightened and no one ever taught me what I needed to know." She said, "I have shamed my family. I have shamed God. I deserve what comes to me." And the cruelest part, the part that keeps me awake at night even now, is that she believed it. She had been taught to believe it her entire life. The machinery of shame had been installed in her so carefully, so thoroughly, that when the moment came that it should have protected her, she turned it on herself instead. Rachel married that young man 3 months later. She was 17 years old and 7 months pregnant at her own wedding. I stood beside her and held her flowers and felt something breaking inside me that I didn't know how to stop. There is a moment I believe every person who has ever left something enormous behind knows, this moment where you can no longer pretend, where the story you have been telling yourself about why everything is fine simply stops working. For me, that moment came about 6 months after Rachel's wedding. I had gone to visit her. She was living in a small house on her husband's family's property. She had a newborn daughter. She looked tired in the way that goes past ordinary tiredness, the kind of tired that settles into a person's eyes and doesn't leave. We sat together in her kitchen and I held the baby, and I watched Rachel move around the room, efficient, quiet, careful, and I realized, with a coldness that spread through me like ice water, that she had stopped being Rachel, not dramatically, not in some obvious visible way, but the girl I had grown up with who laughed too loud sometimes, who had opinions about things, who had loved someone enough to risk everything. That girl was gone. And in her place was a woman who had learned very quickly to make herself small. I put the baby down carefully, and I excused myself to use the outhouse, and standing outside in the cold air, I looked up at the sky, which was enormous and gray, and completely indifferent, and I thought, if I stay here, this is what happens to me. Not the pregnancy, not the forced marriage, but the disappearing. The slow, methodical erasure of everything that makes a person a person. That thought terrified me. And it also, for the first time in my life, felt like clarity. I did not leave overnight. I want to be honest about that, because I think it's important. Leaving the Amish is not like walking out of a building. It is not a clean break. It is more like trying to pull yourself free of something that has roots wrapped all the way around your bones. I spent almost 2 years after that day in Rachel's kitchen quietly, secretly preparing. I found a library, a public library, 40 minutes away by foot, and I started reading. I read everything I could get my hands on. History, biology, books about women's rights, books about psychology, books about the world outside the only world I had ever known. I hid the books in the lining of an old quilt I kept at the bottom of a cedar chest. I read them by flashlight I had found in the ditch alongside the highway where the trucks ran past our property. I was terrified every single day, not just of being caught, though that fear was constant and specific and very real. I was terrified of myself, of the part of me that still believed, in the deepest part of my chest, that leaving was a sin, that I was abandoning God, that the life I was imagining for myself in the outside world was a fantasy, and that I would fail, and that I would deserve that failure. The night I actually left, it was February, 2 in the morning, the ground was frozen, and the sky was completely clear and every star was visible. I had a small bag. I had memorized the address of a shelter that helped people leaving closed religious communities. I had written it on the inside of my left wrist in ink. I stood at the edge of our property at the fence line where our land ended and the road began, and I looked back at the house where I was born, where my mother still slept, where my little sisters were dreaming, warm and unknowing, and I thought of Rachel, and I crossed the fence. I need to be honest with you about what came after, because I think sometimes these stories get told as if leaving is the end, as if freedom is immediate and clean and feels like sunshine. It does not. The first months were the hardest of my life. I didn't know how to use a smartphone. I didn't know how to open a bank account. I didn't understand the bus system, or how to apply for a job, or how to talk to people who had grown up with options. I would stand in grocery stores, overwhelmed by the noise and the light, and the sheer number of choices, and feel a grief so heavy I could barely move. And I was lonely in a way I had never been lonely inside the community, because even in the community, even surrounded by surveillance and control, I had been surrounded by people who knew me. Outside I was nobody, no history, no context, no one who knew my name from before I chose it for myself. I also, in those first months, felt something that I was ashamed of feeling. I missed home. Not the rules, not the silence, not the fear, but the morning light through the kitchen windows, the smell of fresh bread, my mother's hands, my sister's voices, the particular way the fields looked in October, when the corn was cut and the earth was bare and beautiful. That grief is real. I want you to know that. It doesn't make the leaving wrong, but it is real. I got my GED 18 months after I left. I am enrolled in community college. I work at a bakery, which makes me laugh sometimes, because some things are harder to leave than others. I have a small apartment. I have friends, real ones, who chose me freely, and I am building, slowly, a life that is mine. I want to close by saying something that I hope doesn't get misunderstood. I am not telling you that every Amish person is suffering. I am not telling you that the community is evil, or that the people inside it are bad people. My parents were not bad people. Rachel's mother was not a bad person. They were people who had themselves been formed by a system that valued the community over the individual, and they passed that system on, as people do, not out of cruelty, but out of genuine belief, out of love even. A love so shaped by that system that it sometimes couldn't tell the difference between protection and control. What happened to Rachel was not unique to the Amish world. Girls are silenced and shamed for their bodies in communities all over the world, religious and secular, rural and urban, rich and poor. The specifics change. The machinery is older than any of them, but what I carry with me from Rachel's story, from my own story, is this. When we teach girls that their worth is conditional, when we teach them that love must be earned through compliance, when we teach them that their bodies are potential sources of shame, rather than homes they deserve to feel safe in, we are not protecting them. We are preparing them to disappear. Rachel is still there. I think about her every day. We cannot speak, she has been told not to, and I understand that. I don't blame her for it, but I think about her little girl sometimes, and I hope more than I have hoped for anything that when that little girl is old enough to ask questions, someone will give her real answers, even if the answers are hard, especially if the answers are hard. If you made it to the end of my story, thank you. Not because I need validation. I have spent a long time learning that my worth is not something other people give me, but because what I shared today took me years to be able to say out loud, and every time someone truly listens, one of those years gets a little lighter. If this story opens something in you, a question, a memory, a recognition, don't let it close back up. Ask the question, look for the answer. And if you know someone who is living inside silence right now, not necessarily Amish, but silent, in whatever way silence gets built around people, be gentle with them. Be patient, and leave a door open. Sometimes all it takes is a door left open. I was told that I didn't have a voice. I'm still deciding what to do with it. But today felt like a good place to start.